In the world of gaming, practice makes perfect. It may be frustrating to see the game over screen repeatedly, but losing is part of the process of any title. To learn how to succeed after all, you must first fall arse over fist. And fortunately for us anyway, there is a community in this, as there are some games where everyone fell into the same traps. With that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 mistakes everyone made in popular video games. Number 10. Not completing side quests before the end, Fallout 3. Since Fallout 3 is packed with a vast open world, extra missions, and intriguing bonuses, there's plenty to come back to once you complete the story. At least there is in theory. See, in the climax, your character has to die no matter what, by wading into an irradiated chamber to interact with a water purifier. Even worse for you, the player, since you kicked the bucket in this ending, it's actually impossible to return to the wasteland unless you restart the whole thing or load an earlier save, if you're lucky enough to have one. So if there was any place or person that you wanted to check out after winning the game, you were out of luck. And remember, this was way back before games warned you that you were about to hit the point of no return, and as a result, fans had no idea that they were about to jump into a mission that would end their experience. As you can imagine, the outcry for this issue was so infamous that it forced the company to fix it with the Broken Steel DLC. However, this installment made some fans even more furious since they had to pay to keep exploring the wasteland to avoid starting from scratch. Number 9. Turning on the light, Disco Elysium. In the world of Disco Elysium, you play as a detective who's tasked with solving a murder. The twist is, the character you play as is a drunken total liability. As an RPG, with every room you enter and every person you encounter, you'll be given a plethora of options on your next course of action. Even though these choices often sound simplistic, every decision you make, whether it's wiping a mirror or walking away from someone, can have major consequences. And the game lets you know just how important the most innocuous of decision can be from the very beginning. See, in the opening scene, you wake up in a trashed hotel room with a hangover, and by walking around, you'll be asked if you want to turn on the light bulb. However, the bright light will hurt your hungover eyes, and if you go through with it, will actually dock you a health point. And if your physique is too low, activating the light will cause you to suffer a heart attack. Because no one would think twice about performing such a simple choice, pretty much everyone turns on the light, teaching the player that every action, no matter how small, has a reaction. Number 8. The game makes you think you have more time, Fable 3. In Fable 3, your character must form an army large enough to lead a revolution against the tyrannical king of Albion. But upon defeating the monarch, you learn that there's an even bigger primordial evil destined to destroy the kingdom within 1 year. As you take charge of the kingdom then, you must carefully strategize to expand your numbers, prepare coordinated attacks and defenses, and supply yourself with enough weapons and remedies for the looming threat. Now, any rational person will probably have the same mentality while organizing this plan. After a quarter of a year has passed, you should have prepared a quarter of your strategy. When you're halfway through the year, you should be half ready, etc, etc. So you can imagine how confusing it was to see the schedule suddenly change from 121 days left until attack and skip right to 0 days left until attack in an instant. If you hope to make some further preparations, well, tough luck, because Fable 3 tricks you into being ill-equipped and unready for the final confrontation, so it goes without saying that pretty much everyone got their asses handed to them the first time they took part in this battle. Number 7. Stealing The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. In The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, our hero can purchase supplies at numerous shops, which will assist him on his travels. However, one shop that immediately stands out is the town tool shop. To make a purchase here, you need to pick up the desired item, walk up to the shopkeeper, and then exchange some rupees. If you try to leave the shop without buying it though, the shopkeeper will yell at you to put it back. But through crafty trial and error, players noticed that they could steal items if they walked out of the shop while the shopkeeper wasn't looking in their direction. The first time you pull this off, you might think that you've stumbled onto some glitch that will allow you to obtain any of the shopkeeper's prized possessions for nothing. Pretty much the perfect crime. Sadly though, it's not quite, because upon re-entering the shop, the owner does punish Link for his thievery by shooting him with an electric beam, instantly killing him. Because there is no way to permanently steal something from the shop unless you never re-enter, this is a mistake that players will only ever make once. Number 6, the only puzzle in the game that stumps players, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. The gameplay of the original Sonic the Hedgehog games were far from complicated. In every level, you jumped, spun, sprung, and dashed through enemies, corkscrews, and loop-de-loops. But one thing early Sonic titles didn't focus on much was puzzles. That is, until you reached Carnival Night Zone Act 2 in Sonic 3. At one point, our blue-furred hero will discover the path below is blocked by a spinning barrel, and by jumping on the platform, it will momentarily drop down before bouncing back up. For first-time players, it looks like you need to jump on the block over and over until it drops low enough for you to reach the bottom. But no matter how many times you try, you always barely come up short. So you then might experiment with how high to jump, or you might get your partner Tails involving his extra weight to push the platform down. However, the solution is astoundingly simple. By simply pressing up and down while standing on the barrel, you can raise and lower it accordingly, allowing you to reach the area below. It might sound simple now, but this section of the game became so infamous that Sonic creator Yuji Naka was obligated to apologize for it. Number 5, no one is ready for the first attack, Undertale. There are some bosses that are so difficult that it doesn't even seem feasible to beat them on first try. But Sans from Undertale takes this concept to an even greater extreme. No matter what preparations you made or how wary you are of Sans' brutal difficulty, everybody dies upon this first encounter before he's even finished his first attack. And the reason why is simple, it comes out of nowhere. The first time you initiate this battle, Sans starts talking about the beauty of the world, the blooming flowers, and the singing birds. Because of the way he speaks, you might assume that this is just the beginning of a drawn-out speech, which is pretty standard for final bosses. But while in mid-sentence, he suddenly launches an assault at you, which absolutely messes up your day. By the time the player even realizes the fight has already begun, it's too late. It's game over, baby, and you lost. Number 4, didn't scan the data on the frigate, Metroid Prime. Anyone well acquainted with the Metroid series should be aware that you need to pick up every collectible to unlock a secret ending. However, this is much harder in the Metroid Prime series than in previous entries for 2 reasons. First, you need to scan every item, enemy, boss, and file, which is incredibly time-consuming, and secondly, you only have 1 chance to scan certain things. In fact, many players discovered the hard way. See, Prime opens in a section called the Frigate Orpheon, which contains a boss and a log file which cannot be found in any other part of the game. And once you leave this area, it explodes, giving you no means to scan these items again if you did miss them. It goes without saying then that anyone who played Metroid Prime 2 and 3 went through the opening level with a fine-tooth comb, terrified of making the same mistake twice. Number 3, missing the tutorial, Elden Ring. With Elden Ring following the From Software difficulty formula, a lot of fans were actually prepared for the lovable BS that the game threw their way. However, at 12 million copies sold and counting, for a lot of players, Elden Ring was their first taste of From shenanigans. As a result, there was a lot of chatter online about the game needing a tutorial, which you might think is a bit weird because there is one right at the beginning of the game. You jump down a hole, learn the basics of combat, and then move out into the open world. The issue is, so many players seemingly manage to miss this. And the problem is because you have 2 directions to go early on. One is brightly lit on the main path and leads you to a big door that you can't miss. The other is off to the right and requires you to take a leap into a big dark pit. So, can you guess which of these led to the tutorial? If you guessed the scary dark pit, well, you'd be right. And as a result, a bunch of gamers just didn't notice it or were too cautious to throw themselves down to their potential death. Number 2, fighting Emerald without underwater materia, Final Fantasy VII. Nearly every Final Fantasy has a selective boss who's light years harder than anything else in the game. Final Fantasy VI had the Magi Master, Final Fantasy IX had Ozma, but one boss who causes gamers to work themselves into a cold sweat at the mere mention of his name is Emerald Weapon. By exploring the sea in Final Fantasy VII, you are bound to bump into this god-tier enemy at some point. And as you would expect, this nasty chap has an absurd level of health, 1 million HP in fact, devastating attacks, and regenerative abilities. But the biggest problem is the fact that you're only given 20 minutes to defeat him. And this is kind of a catch-22, since all of the most powerful magic attacks and summons also take the longest to perform. As a result, even if you fought Emerald flawlessly, most players ran out of time before they cut his health bar in half. Sadly, a lot of people had no idea that you could get rid of the time limit if you just assigned your party with underwater materia, which can be traded from the Calm Traveler with a guidebook. Many players lost to Emerald over and over trying to get their time down, unaware that they could just avoid the fight's biggest hurdle by possessing this artifact. Number 1. Fighting the first zombie as Chris, Resident Evil. The worst thing that you can possibly do while playing a Resident Evil game is panic. When you hear shuffling, see something lurking in the shadows, or enter an uncharted room, the last thing you need to do is work yourself into a frenzy. At all times, you must stay vigilant and use your limited weaponry precisely and sparingly. Unfortunately, nobody does this since Capcom's horror franchise is designed to scare the absolute bejesus out of you, especially the original. Here, as zombies burst through doors, smash through windows, or resurrect themselves as the far deadlier Crimson Heads, the player has the tendency to freak out and start running about like a headless chicken. However, it's the first encounter with a zombie as Chris that's the real test here. See, this character only has a knife at this point, and if you panic and go in with slashes to try and take the shriveled up bollock down, there's a good chance that he'll just munch you to death. The knife here is an absolute liability, and you're better off getting out of there or running around this first enemy rather than trying to take him head on. If you chill though, it's totally fine, just use the gun and start shooting away.